The majority of auto mechanics are honest. Whether you come in for an oil change, an alignment, a modification, or a full-on restoration, most car mechanics, auto garages, and body shops are going to be upfront and honest with you, because it doesn't make sense for long-term business to be dishonest. And as my mechanic told me the other day, word tends to get out pretty fast when a mechanic is ripping people off. But because the overwhelming majority of auto mechanics are honest, it's that much more devastating to the public perception of the auto repair profession when dishonest mechanics take advantage of consumers. And if recent studies are to be believed, it's now gotten to the point where Americans just don't trust mechanics anymore like they used to. So what are the red flags of a dishonest mechanic? What can you do to protect yourself? How can you fight back after you've been taken for a ride? And what are some of the worst instances of mechanic dishonesty our viewers have ever encountered? This is a special follow-up to last year's Roman report on dealer markups, since dealerships aren't the only ones charging exorbitant prices.
Roman report, and I'm following up, and I make what I want when I feel like discussing cars again.
Last July, Consumer Reports released the results of a survey they'd actually conducted the previous year, surveying 1,000 drivers ages 18 and over to find out if Americans actually trust their mechanics. Now, I didn't know at the time of making this video that the National Institute for Automotive Service Excellence had designated the month of June as Automotive Service Professionals Month, which is why it's awkward to have to reveal that, generally speaking, Americans really don't trust their mechanics. Not completely, anyway. The study found that a whopping 78% of respondents have some level of mistrust towards their mechanics. But it wasn't all bad, because 22% stated that they always trust their mechanics, while only 9% said they never trust their mechanics. But the responses become more troubling for the perception of the auto repair profession when you consider that only 17% of the respondents to the survey felt that they were being charged fairly for services. And I have to believe that the 9% encompasses a lot of people who do their own maintenance. Men were shown to be more trusting of their mechanics, whereas women were more skeptical, which relates to the survey finding that women were more likely than men to seek out advice related to a mechanic's recommendation. Now, we're going to make ourselves a list of the ways a dishonest mechanic will take you for a ride, and we're going to start with the most obvious deceptive tactic, which, surprisingly, isn't overcharging. No, it's number 1. Taking advantage of a customer's lack of automotive knowledge. This is the heading under which the majority of complaints against dishonest mechanics will go. Unnecessary services rendered. Bogus preventative maintenance recommendations. All of it is predicated on customers not having enough car knowledge to be able to call BS. Maybe a customer brings their car in for an oil change only to be told, hey, we changed your oil, but we notice your brake pads are at 6mm, so we really think you should get those replaced. I just don't want you having to pay a small fortune when the rotors go, with that fake modesty like they're doing you a favor. As the survey showed, the average Joe is less likely than your average Jane to dig deeper into what the dishonest mechanic is telling them, because it sounds serious, it sounds official, and it's spoken with the authority of knowledge, so they agree, and now they've paid extortionate amounts of money when all they really needed and all they really wanted was an oil change. If you don't know cars, any terms the mechanic uses may as well be an alien language, And this is before getting into the times when an underhanded mechanic tricks a customer with a very real-sounding part or service that is completely made up. Well, It looks like your trunk fluid needs to be changed, and your fuel bypass filter has a tear in it, and the radio coolant is looking kind of dirty, so we should probably do a flush. But I'll tell you what, if you get the glove box rotator alignment, we'll reprogram your digital oil exhaust valve system at no charge. That's a $75 value. We're just gonna take it off your bill. And look, we all know the jokes about blinker fluid, but this is a problem that's compounded by the fact that there are plenty of real auto parts that sound entirely made up. You'll probably think you did the smart thing, cursing out that mechanic and storming out of the shop for having the nerve to tell you that your harmonic balancer needs to be replaced, and your donut gasket and banjo bolt aren't looking too great either. It's an easy trap to fall into, which is why the solution for this one is actually pretty easy. Well, not easy, but it's something you can do from the comfort of your own home. And that's learn about your car. That's what the owner's manual is for. That's what the manufacturer's recommended maintenance schedule is for. Hell, that's what the internet is for. Because knowledge is the difference between getting an unnecessary timing belt change and being able to flip off the mechanic for trying to tell you that you need a replacement some 20,000 miles before it would realistically be due. But for another perspective, I reached out to my mechanic, Tom, from King's Auto Repair in West Reading, Pennsylvania. An amazing shop full of knowledgeable and honest people, and one of the pillars of my wonderful hometown. And one of his recommendations is the Motorist Assurance Program, which is not only an industry-wide program that promotes uniform inspection and communication standards between consumers and auto mechanics, it also provides educational services for consumers to be able to learn about their vehicle systems so they can be more informed when they bring their car in for service. It seems to be a pretty good resource if you're trying to sort of get your beak wet when it comes to learning about the things that you should know about your car. Now, of course, it's a case-by-case basis because every car is different. So you need to really tailor your education to the car you own. But I've linked it in the description so you can check it out for yourself and come to your own conclusions. Which brings us to the second way dishonest mechanics rip you off. Number 2. By just straight up lying. I reached out to our wonderful patrons over on Patreon for their horror stories, and it was actually pretty surprising how often dishonest mechanics would just straight up lie, making up things that weren't actually wrong with the car in an attempt to get you to pay for a service you don't need. A patron who goes by the nickname Hemi took his 98 RAV4 into a shop for its annual inspection, expecting it to pass, which is why it was such a big surprise when it failed. The reason that the mechanics gave him was that the rubber brake hoses to the calipers were dry rotted, so they needed to be replaced at a cost of $385. Hemi took a hard pass on that and bought some caliper brake hoses of his own for $20 and then replaced them himself in half an hour. When he finally had the original hoses in his hands to inspect for himself, not only were they not dry rotted, they weren't even cracked. Which isn't actually the worst part, as Hemi relates that in trying to push a service he didn't need, they ended up completely missing a service he did need, as the right front CV axle boot was torn all the way open. Another patron named Nick, great name, told us about the time his father's 102,000-mile, faithfully maintained 2008 Lincoln Town Car was taken into a dealership for a new cruise control module and an air conditioner recharge. Because his dad had always stayed on top of maintenance, he was baffled by the mechanic telling him he needed new spark plugs, coil packs, rear leaf springs, and a timing belt. The mechanic had the poor guy seriously stressed out. But Nick immediately knew his dad was being lied to. For one, the car didn't have a timing belt, but a timing chain. And okay, maybe the mechanic misspoke and said belt when he really meant chain. But there was no way this car could need new rear leaf springs since it had a rear air suspension. And to top it all off, Nick had changed the spark plugs himself just 2 weeks earlier. So again, it kind of goes to show how essential car knowledge can be as a defense against getting played. But there are other potential ways to protect yourself from this level of deception that don't just involve learning about your car, or about cars in general. In this situation, the best defense is learning how to perform as many of your own services as you are capable of performing yourself. Because obviously you're not going to be able to do everything that your car might need. But just learning to do your own oil changes could potentially save you hundreds over the lifetime of owning your vehicle. And it's not just oil changes either. Plenty of people do their own brakes, their own timing belts, I changed my own alternator with the help of a friend. But trust me, if someone as mechanically disinclined as I am can do that sort of thing, I gotta believe that you can too. I believe in you. More than I believe in me. I believe in you. Now, Amy Knopfzeiger, the director of fraud victim support for the AARP Fraud Watch Network, had a suggestion on how to deal with these companies in an article for AARP, stating that consumers should, quote, check out the company's rating on the Better Business Bureau website and do an internet search to see if it has any complaints from consumers or other red flags. An easy way is to type the company's name and the words complaints or reviews after the name. End quote. RCR patron Brad offered his own advice on how to protect yourself from his unique position as a dealership mechanic. His recommendation is to request to be shown the bad parts, even if the mechanic tries to push back against this request. As Brad put it, quote, you'll be amazed at how many times they'll change their tune once you challenge them. End quote. However, he reiterates what's likely to become this video's refrain, that education is the key to everything. Quote, some techs try to be clever and keep bad parts lying around from random vehicles to show. If you don't want to be taken for a ride, please educate yourself on your particular vehicle and how it works so you don't end up buying an oil change and battery flush on your Tesla. End quote. However, even if a mechanic is being honest with you about what needs to be replaced, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll be paying a fair price. Number 3. Overcharging and upselling. Ugh. And here we are, finally at the main point that I think a lot of people have an issue with. Arguably more prevalent than weaponizing a customer's lack of knowledge, overcharging can run the gamut from upselling customers on things they don't need to charging OEM prices for aftermarket parts. Maybe your car really does need a new battery. Maybe that chip in the windshield really is too far gone to fill. Maybe it would be a good idea to get a rotation to keep the tread wear even. But $500 for a new battery? $650 for a new windshield on a Toyota Corolla? $225 for a rotation? And what's wild is that not all of the services pushed are the big ticket ones. Sometimes it's death by 1,000 cuts. This is where the upselling comes in, with the window tints and the Simonize and the new tires when your current tires still have plenty of tread. New wiper blades that supposedly help deflect rain better when your current wiper blades plus a $7 bottle of Rain-X would be every bit as effective against Mother Nature's gap sweat. ABC News' 2020, who's done I don't even know how many countless sting operations at mechanic shops over the years, interviewed a mechanic for a story in 2014 who noted that dishonest mechanics essentially weaponize the check engine light, or what they call the idiot light, to scare customers into paying more than they have to, for services they don't really need. They can even use it as a pretext to overcharge on simple labor, and then tacking on an additional charge for gravy work, which is billing a customer for more labor time than a job requires. I asked my mechanic Tom about this one, and he notes that overcharging tends to happen with shop owners who didn't actually do the math on what it would cost to run a business honestly. They put coupons out there for any old service without running the numbers on what keeps them in business. Then they realize they aren't actually making any money by undervaluing their services, and so they resort to shady practices to make up the difference, such as adding extra items to a work order, or straight up sabotaging a car to get customers to buy an expensive service. In his dealership days, Tom has seen guys spray struts with oil to get them to look like they're leaking. And by the same token, dealership mechanic Brad has seen a guy take a grinder to a brake pad just to upsell a brake job, which is really dangerous because sabotaging the brakes just to get the customer to pay for a brake job doesn't mean that the customer is actually going to pay for a brake job. They could still decline the service or decide to go to another shop, get a second opinion, and once they leave the lot, not only are they in danger of those brakes failing, other motorists on the road with them are in danger from whatever kind of accident could potentially be caused by mechanical sabotage. And to Tom's point, I do feel like dishonesty stems from the assumption that being a mechanic is going to be more immediately lucrative than it might end up actually being. There was this viral story, I believe it was last month, where a cancer nurse quit her job to become a mechanic and quickly started bringing in $400,000 a year. People see the headline and then they don't read the article, and maybe they just assume that it's easier to become a mechanic and make money that way than it is to do anything else because you're essentially calling your own shots, and people have an intrinsic trust in you in the same way people trust their therapist, they trust their doctor, they trust their bartender. But dishonest mechanics have been the ones eroding that trust in the automotive repair profession itself. Yet one interesting thing that gets overlooked that was touched upon by ABC News in their sting operation is that some dishonest mechanics really don't want to be dishonest, but instead feel pressure from their bosses or managers to push services on customers or to find something wrong. And they go along with it because they need to make ends meet. They need their job. That's how you get the old air filter scam that's been run for I don't even know how many generations now, where they claim it's completely filthy and even bring the filter out to show it to you, yet it's not even your filter that they're showing you, it's just a stunt filter they use as a prop to scare customers into thinking they need a new one. It's a scam that's practically as old as cars themselves. Now, what's the solution? Well, my own advice would be to never give blanket approval for repairs. Basically, giving a blanket approval to all repairs is like writing a business a blank check. And while the majority of mechanics wouldn't abuse that, the dishonest ones will clean you out faster than a jar of prunes. And this is why I'd also recommend getting an estimate on the work the mechanic says they need to perform. And then, shop around. Granted, maybe it's an emergency and the car had to be towed into that shop in the first place. But as veteran automotive technician Tim Miller noted in a guest article for the website Backroad Planet, even in an emergency, you should only have an emergency mechanic fix emergency problems. As Miller writes, quote, "Treat the emergency repair as first aid, and have the full treatment done by your trusted mechanic." End quote. And it's good advice, even if you don't already have a trusted mechanic and just need time to shop around, because the cost of having your car towed to another location could still potentially be less than what you'd end up paying at a shop that's transparently trying to rip you off. But this is another situation where learning how to do services yourself to the best of your ability could also potentially help you. And that's the thing, a lot of the solutions for each bullet point are going to be cross-applicable, because the more knowledge you have, the better armed you're going to be when it comes to dealing with potentially dishonest mechanics, and the more empowered you'll be to avoid them altogether. And yet, for as bad as being overcharged might be, it's worse to be overcharged by a mechanic who... Number 4. Does nothing. Yes, some mechanics will charge you for a service you don't need and then not do it. In 2013, in Phoenix, Arizona, an undercover vehicle was towed into a body shop. Authorities had shut off the fuel cutoff switch on the vehicle and then played dumb, asking the mechanic to diagnose and fix their car. The mechanic proceeded to reset the switch, fixing the issue in short order. But when the bill came due, the undercover operator was charged $340 for a fuel pump replacement that was never performed and wasn't even needed in the first place. The subsequent lawsuit against the mechanic included over 50 complaints that alleged that, quote, they failed to make promised repairs, they kept their vehicles for months or years, returned them stripped of parts in the same or worse mechanical condition, and repeatedly lied to customers about their vehicle's status and supposed refunds. End quote. So how do you protect yourself against a shady mechanic who doesn't do the work they say they're gonna do? Echoing the earlier advice of dealership mechanic Brad, Tom notes that in some states you can ask for the old parts back after the work is performed, so that you know for certain that the work has been done. And I know, how do you know they're actually giving you your old alternator back and not just handing you some alternator they had laying around? And this is why some owners have taken to marking their parts. For instance, some people initial their air filter so that dishonest mechanics can't pull the old dirty air filter trick I talked about earlier. And you can do this with just about any part on your car if you can reach it. And if you can reach it, you can check to see if the supposedly new part still has your signature on it. Whether you marked it with a Sharpie or with nail polish, whatever you ended up using. You can also ask for photos or videos of the work being performed. This is something more and more shops are doing now, with some even including the photos in the paperwork. So try and find a shop that either does this or is open to doing it. Now, another evergreen pearl of wisdom is something Tom reiterated to me, that you shouldn't be afraid to get a second opinion. And I agree, because even honest mechanics are fallible and might miss something or misdiagnose a problem. I would also say that even doing something as simple as checking your fluid levels can reveal whether a mechanic is lying to you about work they say they performed. For instance, I've had friends tell me about shops that would just top off their coolant rather than fully flushing it, or recommending an oil change when the dipstick suggested there were still potentially thousands of miles left before they would need one. So yeah, check your fluids, because if they're lying about the fluids, they might be lying about other work they performed. Now, while I know that possibly the clearest advice here would be to try and find an ASE certified shop, or whatever your country's governing body is for automotive service excellence, a reputable shop can still have the occasional rogue element, as we'll see later. In that sense, a great piece of advice from Tim over at Backroad Planet is to ask people you trust for recommendations. As he explains, quote, a trusted person will refer you to a quality mechanic. Also, chances are high that mechanics will treat you better when they know you have been referred to them. End quote. With all that said, sometimes you'll pick up your car from a mechanic only to find yourself wishing they hadn't performed the work at all. Because arguably the worst kind of mechanic is the kind who Number 5. Makes things worse. In some rare instances, a shoddy or dishonest mechanic may leave your car in worse condition than it was when you brought it in. In 2022, a pair of mechanics at a Hyundai dealership in Monroeville, Pennsylvania, were accused of damaging parts on a vehicle brought in for service. The accused were alleged to have intentionally caused separation in the brake pads using a hammer and a flathead screwdriver. Weirdly, even though the two mechanics confessed, the dealership fought back against the claims of sabotage. And in a way, it's similar to a story by an RCR patron going by the nickname Wangles Bojangles, who told me the story of getting quoted $1,100 to replace the ECU on his 2012 Chevy Cruze, along with half the wiring harness which had supposedly shorted out and burned. He got the work done, and the car appeared to be running well at first, except it wouldn't go into 4th gear. Now, while plenty of things were wrong with the car when he brought it in, the transmission had not been one of them. So he took it back right away and told them what the problem was and that they needed to make this right. And they totally agreed. All they needed was $9,000 to replace the transmission. So yeah, Wangles refused, yet they still charged him $250 for diagnosing the problem, a problem that they themselves had caused. So what's the best way to catch a dishonest mechanic in an act of sabotage? Well, in talking with Tom, one of the remedies is to take before and after photos. Even if it means getting under your car to snap a few photos or going all over the engine bay in the nooks and crannies, just so you have some sort of visual record of your car's condition before you took it in. A UK-based RCR patron named Kevin recalled the time his dad took his Fiat in for a gearbox service. The dealership tried to charge him for new brake discs and pads, but luckily Kevin's dad had snapped some photos of the car's condition prior to going in. So the dealership's claim that it needed a brake job was proven unambiguously false. So snapping a few before and after photos can really save you a ton of headaches later on. But if, for some reason, you don't get a detailed work order when you go pick your car up, one that denotes each service performed as well as the reason it was performed, like if they don't give you that, definitely ask for one. Hell, ask for it before any work is done in the first place. And if they give you a hard time about it, CarParts.com recommends lodging a complaint with a consumer protection agency, such as the Better Business Bureau, or even your state attorney general's office. They also suggest disputing the charge with your credit card company. Although the issue here is that if the garage didn't give you sufficient paperwork, you might not have enough documentation to provide to your credit card company or your bank for them to be able to conduct their investigation. So it's a dicey situation, and this is why it's important to insist on a paper trail being created. However, you might need to call your bank anyway if the shop decides to play number 6. The quoting game. Some dishonest mechanics will talk you into the building by giving you bogus quotes for services that are traditionally more expensive. I mentioned a case from Phoenix, Arizona earlier, and I'm not sure if Phoenix is just a hotbed of dishonest mechanic activity, but a different case from 2016 showed that mechanics caught in a sting operation had advertised transmission rebuilds to Spanish-speaking consumers at rates of $189 to $375 for a full transmission rebuild. In court, the defendants admitted that they would never honor these unrealistically low rates and would only notify customers of the actual cost of the repair work after already taking the transmissions apart. In court, the defendants admitted that they would never honor these unrealistically low rates and would only notify customers of the actual cost of the repair after already taking the transmissions apart. At this point, if the customer refused to have their car repaired, the shop would still charge them hundreds of dollars just to put the transmission back together, without any repairs having been performed at all. Which is why the solution for this one is to research what services typically run for in your area, since certain services will vary by location. You could even cold call some shops and ask what they're charging for certain services for your car, just to get a range on what these services should cost. And as always, you can ask for an itemized estimate before agreeing to any work. Interestingly, Tom notes that more and more shops are adopting point-of-sale systems that will send out work orders for customers to sign or otherwise approve, so shops know exactly what the customer expects, and the customer knows they won't find any nasty surprises on their bill. However, as we'll see, a signature won't always protect you from shops that perform Number 7. Unauthorized work. Just last month in Monroe County, Pennsylvania, a mechanic was arrested and charged with forgery. A customer had brought his RAV4 in for repairs covered by warranty, only for the car to remain in this shady mechanic's possession for well over a month, as he forged the customer's signature in order to submit bogus repair work orders to the warranty company. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he performed an unnecessary and unauthorized axle replacement, and then refused to release the car unless the owner paid $800. If there's anything remotely redeemable about this guy, it's that at least he didn't deny doing the forgeries, which is more than could be said for a mechanic based out of Oklahoma, who charged a woman $700 for a timing chain replacement in January 2024, and then did unauthorized work that grenaded the engine. And what do you know, he refused to pay the court-ordered $4,000 in restitution to the woman, insisting he didn't do anything to the engine. But the saddest instance is the story of a man from Henderson, Nevada, who took his 2018 Hyundai Tucson to get a new engine at a cost of $7,000. The man paid $5,000 of the bill up front, and subsequently never saw his car again. The mechanic just ghosted the guy. He wouldn't return phone calls and straight up closed down his shop, disconnected the phone number and everything. The Tucson's owner had to continue making monthly payments on a car he didn't possess, which meant he couldn't even complete his annual registration on it. When a local news crew tried to visit the shop, the owner called the police to have them removed from his property. And removing the news crew is more than the police did for the Tucson owner himself, who was told that there was nothing they could do since this was a civil matter. It's a total nightmare made all the more heartbreaking by the Tucson owner telling his local news that he's willing to pay the remainder of what he owes on the engine if he could just get his car back. But I can't find any evidence that he ever did. Now, to reiterate, one avenue for prevention is looking for shops with good reviews, strong word of mouth, or certifications like the Automotive Service Excellence or ASE designation. But if they've already performed unauthorized work, this is another case where you can reach out to your bank, lodge a complaint with the Better Business Bureau, or make inquiries to your state attorney general. But one thing that a woman in Brooklyn did that worked for her, even if it didn't ultimately work for the Tucson owner, was reaching out to the media, as some people have found success at getting problems rectified by turning it into a news story. Just last year, a New York woman had her car towed to a shop after an accident, but the shop kept her car for 10 months, refusing to release it to her unless she paid excessive storage fees. Had the story not gained widespread attention after being featured on CBS News New York, the woman says she probably never would have seen her car again. And you see this happening even outside of print or TV news, when stories catch fire over social media. People have put dishonest companies on blast over social media to varying levels of success. Some companies dig their heels in, while others give in just to make the bad publicity go away, while other, more honest companies take accountability and rectify the situation. Now, I'm not saying you should air all your business out on TikTok or Facebook, but sometimes even a bad review that shares your honest experience can prompt corrective action. And it also keeps businesses honest to know that a bad customer experience has the potential to destroy their entire public perception. And if nothing else, calling out bad businesses in reviews on sites like Google or Yelp can also be a kind of public service, helping to steer others from landing in the clutches of a dishonest business. Because an honest business will go above and beyond. As Tom notes, an honest business that makes a mistake will do everything they can to make it right, because word travels fast, and dishonest mechanics make everyone look bad. Ultimately, a scam will succeed or fail based on a customer's level of automotive knowledge. And the more education you have, the more tools you'll have in your arsenal. But as we've seen, education isn't everything. I genuinely do believe that the overwhelming majority of mechanics are honest, because the long-term damage to a business's reputation isn't going to be worth the short-term gain that dishonesty offers. It's important that we expect the respect and dignity of being dealt with honestly and with equity and fairness, but it's just as important to have the knowledge to protect yourself from people who don't hold those same values of fairness. But what tips and pointers do you have for dealing with shady mechanics? How do you protect yourself? And what are some of your horror stories? I want to hear them all, seriously. I'll be in the comments, look out for the screen name Limited Time Roman. I genuinely love interacting with you on these videos. And if you'd like me to make more of them, and maybe even have your story featured in one, join our Patreon where you'll get these videos before anybody else, along with exclusive content that will never be posted here. Help RCR not only to continue, but to become unstoppable. We can absolutely do this. Just $1 a month to access even more RCR and help ensure that we can keep this show running. I also put up some of the classic RCR shirt designs over on our merch store linked below. And while I doubt anyone would spend $75, for all orders of $75 or more, we're throwing in free shipping, baby. And I'm still dedicated to sending a personalized thank you video for every order that comes into our Fourth Wall store. But one last bit is that if you want a Kunkelman license plate frame or key tag, those are available over on our old Zazzle store. Fourth Wall doesn't have an option for plate frames or key tags. Now, be warned that over on Zazzle, it's not called Kunkelman Chevrolet, it's called Kunkelman Used Cars, because Zazzle didn't like us using the word Chevrolet, but it's another way that you can support the channel. Regardless, I want to thank Tom for sharing his wisdom, and for all of the wonderful patrons who shared their story, their knowledge, and their support. Thank you for helping us to have a job, and thank you for your support. Your viewership keeps this show going. Like, comment, or subscribe, or share the video with someone you think might enjoy it. I hope this was helpful, or at least entertaining. Thank you again, and have an outstanding rest of your week.